mid-90s, mid to late 90s for my undergrad, a long time ago, but it's definitely changed a bit since I was last year. Yeah, fab. Thank you. So yes, I'm Guy Cooper. I work for the Environment Agency, and I'll explain a bit about what I do during the talk. And here today to talk a bit about natural hazards, or some of the natural hazards that the Environment Agency have to deal with. Not focusing so much on the science, because we can argue about sea level rise for hours probably, but more some of the practical challenges that we face in trying to deal with natural hazards. So just introduce myself, hopefully that will move on. There we go. So we're going to look at today. So we're going to look at how we as an environment agency plan and prepare for incidents. So every kind of incident you see on the telly is normally a multi-agency response, and I'll explain that a bit more in a moment, and how we learn from incidents as well. So historic floods, we don't just deal with the incident and then park it. We try and learn as much from it as we can to improve for next time. And then we've only got 40 minutes, so we're cramming a lot in here, but trying to talk about some of the risks and challenges that we face as an organisation in the face of climate change. How some of that can be alleviated through restoring a natural water cycle. So restoring our landscape a bit to manage water in a better way. And a little bit of a thinking discussion point at the end about how we might adapt as communities to future pressures from climate change as well. So like I said, I won't focus on science because we could spend hours talking about flow rates and wind speeds and wave heights, but more some of the practical challenges that we face trying to respond to natural hazards. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Clacton. I came to Essex University, lived in Colchester and now Wivenhoe, so I haven't strayed very far. I started with the Environment Agency in 2000 as an ecologist after finishing a master's degree, taking invertebrate samples, which are done regularly twice a year at set points, so you can see where there might have been pollution incidents and carry out enforcement regulation. As I said, I came to Essex University in the 90s and then was lucky enough to get a master's funded at Lancaster University, so completely different from flat to mountains, and did my master's there with some research in Dorset at the Institute of Freshwater Ecology. And as I said, I started as a biologist, working for the Environment Agency. That we've got such a wide remit that you can start as one thing, very quickly find yourself doing something else. So I was project managing modelling projects for a while for flood risk mapping. And then I got involved in incident response, first through our flood warning service that we provide. And now in my current post, my current job as an area incident team. So covering all the kinds of incidents that we deal with, which I'll talk about in a second. Reason why I haven't moved is because I love this area and I'm very passionate about our coastline. It's a brilliant coastline for walking on and for studying scientifically. Lots of communities at risk, lots of estuaries, intertidal zones, nesses that migrate north and south. So trying to provide a warning service on a coast like that is just 10 years has flown by. I'm also a STEM ambassador, so I try to natural hazards aren't really talked about enough in schools. It's the next generation that are going to have to deal with a lot of these escalated risks, and sometimes we're not very accessible with site visits and that sort of thing. So trying to get STEM resources that can be used in the classroom to mimic coastal processes, which is always quite fun to try to do. So that's enough about me. As we go through, if you're really stuck or you want to ask any questions for clarity, just ask. That's fine. We can be quite informal. What a lot of people probably don't realise is that all the organisations and authorities in England, in the UK, are categorised 1, 2 or 3 under the Civil Contingencies Act 2004. And the Environment Agency is a Category 1 responder. And that's the same as the police and the fire, ambulance, NHS, military and local authorities. And the reason why we do this is because we have an out-of-hours call system for all the sorts of incidents you might encounter in the environment, including flooding. So I'm on call once a week in every 6 or 7 or so, where you can take calls out of hours to try and plan and prepare for flooding. But also, when incidents happen, everyone sort of thinks, oh, no one knows what they're doing or it's all chaotic. It isn't. It's just incidents are big and they overwhelm the resources you've got locally. But we work all the time together as partner organisations to manage those risks that are deemed the top risks on the National Security Risk Assessments. And for us, an East Coast surge is in the top 3 risks along with pandemic flu. And that's what we plan and prepare for with all our partners. And we do that by creating emergency plans that we then, once you make a plan, it's a real pain because you have to exercise it and review it. So you can't just make it and put it on the shelf because you get told off. You have to regularly exercise that in a multi-agency way. And we share learning from incidents. So if there's an incident, sadly, the bombing in the Manchester Arena, we get the reports from that, so we can learn how that multi-agency, where the improvements could be made in the multi-agency response. And sometimes it's grim reading, but that's how we improve as incident responders. Business continuity plans, industrial action, snow, severe weather. What if we lose national power outage and we lose power, how do we respond and keep people safe? What are the basics that we need to do? How do we operate our flood barriers? And this is all done, you might hear local resilience forum as a phrase. So local resilience forum are based on police boundaries, and it's all those organisations all coming together to work together. And the category 2 responders are things like utilities, Anglian Water, Network Rail, so the big infrastructure providers, and we're working with them all the time as well. So what if a reservoir goes pop and we get a reservoir flood? What if the rail lines are at risk of sea level rise, which many of them are? And we operate on a strategic and a tactical and an operational level. So strategic is what you might hear on the news as gold control. So it's when you've got your chief police officer and you're making big strategic decisions about where resource might need to go. In a big East Coast flood, that could affect everywhere from Scotland to Kent. And those strategic groups will be working together to say, where do we send our high volume pumps? Where do we send the military? Tactical is local. So it would be a local response to say, right, that's the strategic direction. Now, where do we send the Land Rovers to go and get the work done? And operational is the people on the ground that are actually doing the work. And that includes flood warning. And just to give you an example, we did a massive flood exercise in November with all my partners in the Norfolk Resilience Forum here. I told them to smile before I took the screenshot. So this is a tactical meeting of all the different organisations: police, Anglian Water, RNLI, got military, got fire, all there to practice what we do in a big East Coast flood. And what do we respond to? So you think you'd respond just to flooding. But these are all the other kind of incidents that we might respond to as well. And we won't go through all these because we haven't got time, but it's just to give you an idea that the threats that are out there to the environment and the communities within them. And that can be anything from odour complaints from chicken farms to wildfires to air quality issues, nuclear issues as well, nuclear, radiological, biological incidents as well. Just to give you a flavour of what some of those things look like. We have enforcement officers that have set powers to enforce on the big criminal fly tipping. So when you think of fly tipping, you think of a mattress and a lay-by. But unfortunately, Essex seems to be sort of plagued a bit by criminal gangs that will make a lot of money out of disposing of waste for people. But this costs the public a lot of money to clear up. This is a very old photo, you can tell by the uniforms, but we're often involved in road traffic incidents as well. If you think of anything that's going to be transported on a lorry spilling into groundwater or water, surface waters like rivers and things, then the fire service would get in touch with us because they may need advice on things like pollution, preventing the pollution, what to do with that polluted water as well, how we can intercept it to prevent environmental issues. It's not very well known, but firefighting foam is about 400 times as polluting as raw sewage. So we've worked with the fire service nationally to sort of say, can you look at different products for firefighting foam as well? And waste fires, again, this is linked to the landfill issue. This was, I won't get political, but it's right near Eric Pipple's house in Essex at Toby Priory. Somebody had rented a piece of land from a farmer that was a bit hard up, said, I'm going to have a waste recycling centre, stacked it full of hundreds of thousands of tonnes of wood, and then torched it and went off. And that's what happens. That's what happens when you deregulate some of the government regulators. But this is a big impact because all that firefighting water is going into the River Withs, which is going to end up in Chelmsford. You're going to lose the dissolved oxygen in the water. You're going to have fish kills, pollution, odour, all that risk. It costs the taxpayer hundreds of thousands of pounds to have this tankered away. Anyway, that's just to give you a flavour of what we do as a category 1 responder. So that's just a grounding. That's the sort of day job that we're doing all the time, preparing for those kinds of incidents. But we're really here to talk about naturally occurring hazards and in particular drought and flood as well. So we have a big remit, and it's probably the first thing you think about, unless you're a fisherman, in which case you probably think about angling, rod licenses and things, but most people think of us as a kind of flood agency. And we have a huge flood risk from rivers in the sea across East Anglia. And it's not a new risk, but certainly there's some challenges with climate change and looking ahead at sea level rise, but also storm frequency, wave heights, wind directions. If you have deeper water, does that change the wave height? There's a lot we need to think about for the future, But in my role, we're thinking about what happens next week, what happens this winter. So for us, it's in the top 3 risks for the country because of the infrastructure at risk, East Coast surges. And we can just do a bit of a timeline of some of the bigger floods that we've had on our coasts. So this is the context that we're coming from and how the information from these incidents helps us plan for the future ones. So 1938, we had quite a large East Coast surge. As I said, surges aren't new. Surges are created by low pressure systems travelling down the North Sea with strong winds. The dune system at Horsey in Norfolk was punctured in several places, and those homes were uninhabitable when the land was salt infiltrated and couldn't be used for agriculture for decades. And that flooded repeatedly on every set of high tides after that until the hole in the dunes was shored up. So that was one of the big floods, but the difference then was we didn't have large flood defences or 24-hour news or social media or a warning or forecasting service or any multi-agency response. So people would have been responding in an isolated way in the dark on their own without any kind of coordinated help. And sadly, that was still the case in 1953. And if you're not aware, we're coming up to the 70th anniversary of the flooding of 1953. It was a really large East Coast surge, travelled all the way down the coast. This is an image of J-Rig further down the Essex coast, and over 300 people were killed in the UK. It's the largest peacetime disaster since the World Wars. And it was a normal natural tidal surge. But again, thinking about sea level rise, we need less of a surge to bring those sea levels up and over the defences. And that's what the same place looks like just now. So we haven't really learned lessons there. We've got a defence now, and we've got a nice foreshore from beach recharge, but we've still got caravans in land that's below sea level. And we have an influence over this kind of thing where we can through planning applications and that kind of thing. But clearly, this is a big dilemma for future generations. What do you do with those people? And what can we do with those defences? And we'll have a quick look at the engineering challenges a bit later as well. So we learned quite a lot from that. And we had surges in the 90s and later in the 70s and the 90s, but we really got a timely reminder in 2007. We were talking about this over lunch. We'd just taken on the flood warning service from the police, and we're just really in our infancy with that multi-agency planning. When along came 9th November 2007, a big surge was coinciding with high tide just at Great Yarmouth. So we had a massive multi-agency response. We evacuated thousands of people. And this image shows the River Yare, which runs through Great Yarmouth. So it's a tidal river into the Norfolk Broads. And you can see how high those boats are there. That's how high the sea level was. And you can see there's plenty of water because defences aren't impenetrable. The water's coming through drains and joins in the defences and underground as well. But it didn't come over like we were predicting it to. The weather system moved slightly off over Europe and didn't come all the way down the east coast to affect us. And so luckily that water didn't spill over because the land slopes away from the source of risk. The land slopes downhill from the river. And just behind that is Southtown Cobham Island, which is part of Great Yarmouth with over 3,000 homes in. So a couple more inches of water and we would have had thousands of people flooded. We learned a lot from that. We weren't great at sharing data, especially in incidents. Everyone's firewalls and email limits stopped us from sharing maps with the police where the tactical and the strategic coordination groups normally are. I was printing out maps and driving them to Suffolk Police because there was no other route, which is ridiculous. So we got together and we learned a lot from it. And we didn't have to wait very long. I'm not sure enough. I always like saying it was Thursday, 5th of December, 2013. We had a really big East Coast surge. We got notification about 5 days before of a very large low pressure system and coming across the North Sea. And our forecast was indicating that we'd have about a 2-metre tidal surge on top of the tide, coinciding with the normal high tide at every point along the coast. And in 2013, that's exactly what we saw. So it was the biggest flood we'd had since 1953. Luckily, unlike in 1953, with that coordinated response, with forecasting, with lots of media attention. The local press were great. They ran lots of chat rooms overnight to debunk myths and keep people informed. It was brilliant. We didn't see any fatalities or any injuries, and we moved, well, we didn't, the professional partners, the police and the fire and the RNLI and the Coast Guard moved thousands of people to safety. And when we issue severe flood warnings and we talk about large dangerous debris, this is the sort of thing we mean. This is Blakeney in North Norfolk, that's the A149. There's a hotel just there. You know, large yachts and things being broken free of their moorings and sort of pushed through railings and defences. So Imagine that happening in the dark with water up to about here. And again, without the warning in advance, places like Walcott in North Norfolk, where you've got low quality housing with single skin walls. This is a lady's bedroom wall that was stoved in by wave action during that storm. So this is the sort of thing we're always trying to prevent. And it's the sort of thing that every winter when we have storm season, we're trying to make sure our service is as good as it can be. But we've got to think to the future as well and how this might change with sea level rise and storm frequency. Again, we did lots of learning from this. We never quite get it right every time. So we spent a lot of the intervening years working with our partners to improve. And January 2017, we had another storm surge, a nice big one, but this time it coincided with low tide. So we saw lots of dramatic waves, lots of sort of structural damage on piers and things, but not that volume of water. And so this is the thing that we're always wrestling with every single winter. How is that storm going to coincide with the normal tide? How big is the storm going to be? How long will it last? How high will those levels get? And who might it flood? And we're trying to sort of give people information down to a householder kind of level, but really, you know, that's almost spurious accuracy. No one can be that accurate, but we're just trying to prevent this kind of thing with people actually still in their homes. So that gives you an idea of some of the East Coast surges we've dealt with. If you think about things like sea level rise and some of the complexities around the science around storm frequency, will we see more frequent storms in the North Sea or fewer? If the position of the jet stream that brings us those storms changes because of the pressure difference between the North Atlantic Oscillation brings the jet stream to the south, then we may see fewer storm surges even. But we've got to look ahead to the future and use all that information to inform spatial planning decisions and that sort of thing, so more people don't build in those areas of risk. Associated with this, although it's not actually Environment Agency's remit, is erosion. And sadly, during that storm, these houses were lost at Hemsby, just north of Great Yarmouth. And I spoke to that homeowner that morning because she got through to the incident room and wanted to know what to do. We just said, just do what the police are telling you to do. We do have a very dynamic, soft, vulnerable coastline on the East Coast, and we can argue the ethics of whether that should be protected or not, or whether it's even technically or economically or environmentally desirable. But the sea's been moving landward, mean sea level has been moving landward since the end of the last ice age, the peak of the last glaciation, when the North Sea started to fill, and all those soft glacial deposit areas are eroding and moving, and the sediment is very dynamic on our coast. But they don't care about that because that's their homes, that's where they've retired to. They just want to know, are they going to still be there in 10, 20 years? And we don't know, sadly. By history on rivers, I won't go back through the whole history. Some of our big floods in 1968 or 2000 and 2001, which dictate a lot of what we do. A lot of the remit of the Environment Agency came about because of a flood in 1998, Easter 1998. Some people were killed by a flood in Northampton, and that led to the Peter Byer report, which made recommendations for flood mapping, which then affected people's insurance premiums and that sort of thing. So it's not always clean cut that it's a good thing, but all those recommendations that came out led to a lot of the work that we do. But you may not know, we had quite a large river flood, fluvial flood in Christmas 2020, 2021, that whole period. It just didn't stop raining. So worse in the Bedford area around the Great Ouse River, quite extensive flooding, and largely due to, it looks a bit cartoony, but this is the easiest way to show the rain radar. The brighter the colours are, the more intense the rainfall. That's millimetres per hour rate. And there's 15-minute time steps. So you can see we'd already had a really wet October and a really wet December. We just come out of drought. And then we had all that wet weather. Everything was saturated. The rivers were full. The groundwater was full. The soil was full. And then it just kept raining. And we got to Christmas Eve and the weather system that's moving northwest kind of stalled and then came back and started moving southwest and just delivered more and more rain for us, giving us those kind of impacts. And ironically or gallingly, quite often when we have big floods, the next day is always a beautiful day, high pressure, lovely sunny skies, and it's a bit incongruous really for those people that are emptying out their homes. But that was a huge flood response for us. It's the biggest flood in that area since 1998 and the biggest in Norfolk since 1968. And it went largely unreported really. And when we're talking about river flooding, quite often it happens in the summer. So these are some historical examples. There's Boscastle with a helicopter there in August 2004, where all the rainfall is a normal weather event, but it all fell on one side of the hill above Boscastle and just came tumbling down through that village. How no one was killed, I don't know. Another example of kind of severe flooding is when you have vulnerable places like caravan parks. So this is Northampton in 2020. And we have loads of extensive caravan parks in East Anglia, and that was completely inundated. And Tewkesbury in July 2007, you can see they knew where the water went in the old days, a bit more in tune with the floodplains, but it's a modern thing we've decided to build in the floodplains, really. And these are all quite historic, but they're all within this century. They're all since 2000, so 2004, 2007. And in our planning applications and in our modelling, we have to take account of additional river flow and additional rainfall amounts when we're giving planning advice, for example, because we'll have a little look later on, you know, when you're building towns and cities right up next to rivers, there's nowhere for the water to go. So what's our role? I'll skip through this quite quickly so we can get onto droughts. But we have a role in forecasting, warning and informing from rivers and the sea. So everything I've just alluded to from an incident point of view, every single day, duty officers, we've got all these gauges, we're getting the forecast, the observed levels, rainfall levels, and we have loads of triggers for different flood warnings and flood alerts. So even on a day like today, there could be flood alerts somewhere, and it may seem a little bit unnecessary, but for the people that receive them, that could be a low-lying area in the Norfolk Broads, for example, where their boatyard needs the flood alert to close the gates to prevent them losing loads of equipment and materials and that kind of thing. I wouldn't say we're issuing flood warnings and flood alerts more frequently, but I've been a flood warning duty officer for 20 years, and I'm seeing more complex patterns of incidents. So whereas before you'd have a couple of thunderstorms in the summer, the autumn, the rainfall would build up and everything would recharge and the rivers would gradually step up in level and you'd issue a few things. And then you get to the winter and you'd have the tidal surges. And we always used to say, we don't see tidal surges and heavy rainfall events at the same time, because tidal surges are low pressures from the north and the heavy rainfall events typically sort of come up from the south. But I'm seeing more and more of those now as a flood warning duty officer. I'm always cautious because that's only 20 years. It is a long time for me, but in terms of weather trends, is that just a blip in the weather? In terms of the tide cycle, there's a 19-year cycle in the tide cycle called the metonic cycle, where you get peaks in the spring tides. And we went through that about 2011 and we issued loads of flood alerts. And that's just a normal astronomical thing that even the Greeks worked out thousands of years ago. So we've got to be careful. Is it climate change? Is it weather? But I'm definitely seeing more combination events of surface water flooding, river flooding and tidal surges. You might not know, there's links at the end of this, but there's gauges everywhere. And they're publicly accessible as well. So this isn't the stuff that we use these gauges, but this is a public facing version. So, you know, rain gauges on Brighton Sea, river level gauge, tide gauges, sorry, was a river level gauge there. So you can access this and have a look at the data in real time yourselves as well. And they're the sort of gauges that we're monitoring all the time to see what's happening out there. And you can see we've got quite good coverage across England, but it's still never enough. There's still always a community in between that you haven't got the information for. And that leads to the flood warnings ultimately. So I could do a whole session on flood warnings, but you're not really here for that today. But this was the flood warning picture a couple of days ago, where we're seeing that wet weather coming from the southwest and swelling across the northwest. And you can see all the red triangles of flood warnings for different communities, and all the oranges are for, all the ambers are for flood alerts for people as well. So always busy and always active, and people that receive those warnings are probably having to deal with water in their businesses and homes just now. Again, this is live on the internet, so you can look at this yourselves. We receive information through a joint venture with the Met Office. So we work with the Met Office all the time. Our Public Weather Service advisor loves us emailing him daily express headlines about barbecue summers and snowy Christmases. Absolutely loves it, never gets fed up with it. Years ago, we realised that the Met Office dealt with the water when it was in the sky, and we dealt with the water when it was on the ground. And although we worked well together, we kind of needed something in the middle. So we've got the Flood Forecasting Centre. It's been around for about 10 years. And it's got a lovely word, hydrometeorologists. So they're looking at what the weather's doing and then trying to work out what it might do on the ground. And they give us some of our high-level products that locally we then turn into something that we try to interpret to help communities locally. And then tidal forecasts. This is bespoke to my bit of coast. And deliberately, you can't read that. But we get this every single day. And this is for, we get this for 10 tides, for 5 days ahead. And each one of these is a different gauge around the coast. So these are mine from Wells round to the Thames Barrier. That's Wells in Norfolk, Cromer, Great Yarmouth, etc. They're all our forecast points. And we get the astronomical tide, what the weather's going to do with the surge, what that totals, what the wind direction is doing, any adjustments from the forecaster, because every single forecast depends on the wind direction, depends on what's already happened. The models can stray from reality. And you've always got a human forecaster that will look at that. And it's a lovely word again, hindcasting, which just sounds like 2020 vision with hindsight, doesn't it? But it's looking at what the model's done, looking at what actually happened. And if the model is straying from reality, making those adjustments, then we get that magic final number for that time. And that's what we base our warnings on. So we get that every single day for 10 tides every single day. And that's great when it's quiet. When it's really busy and your area manager's saying, what's going to happen tomorrow? Where's the latest forecast? It's a bit stressful, but that's happening all the time. And that's based on Met Office modelling, which is then used by us. So that's a quick jaunt through our role in flood warning. As I said, I'm seeing more combination events of surface water and river flooding with tidal flooding. I'm also seeing what I think might be the impacts of sea level rise, where things like the Norfolk Suffolk Broads, it's a zero gradient flat area. The levels are almost the same as they are at Great Yarmouth, where it flows to the sea. And I'm seeing more incidents where businesses are affected because the tide's just not going out as far as it used to. So the challenge of climate change, drought and flood. So from my point of view, from an incident point of view, we're already seeing the impacts of climate change now and of a warming environment. And you're probably well aware of all this, but from a practical incident response point of view, we're seeing those now. So it's not a future risk, it's affecting our lives now. We'll have a quick look at three of the main things that affect incident response. So hotter, drier summers, more extreme rainfall events, and relative sea level rise. So hotter, drier summers. For me, we've got three main risks that we deal with. Drought. Drought is long-term. People forget about drought as soon as we start seeing puddles on the pavement. But drought, my colleagues have been dealing with the drought since April. We're still in drought conditions for most of the country. But ironically, some parts of the country are dealing with drought because the groundwater is not recharged yet. Winter is the recharge period. And also dealing with flood at the surface. And it writes its own kind of Daily Mail headlines, but it's just the reality of the geography. So we can be in drought and dealing with a flood. Low flow in rivers, well, that's associated with drought and low rainfall, but it has lots of its own kind of problems. So I'm trying to do a project at the moment to alleviate some of those and how we manage rivers. And wildfire risk, which I'll skim over because it's not really our remit, but I just like the pictures. And then the hot, dry summers are often punctuated with almost the opposite risk, those heavy thunderstorms, that sudden intense rainfall, and what that does. And that gives you flooding from rapid runoff, so surface water flooding, the water flowing over that hard baked ground. Massive pollution events as that influx of water and surface pollutants get into the rivers and fit the temperature, the thermocline in the rivers as well, and really mess up the ecology in rivers and cause all sorts of issues. So hotter, drier summers. Water is in demand all the time. And we've got people that work for us that are dealing with abstraction licenses all the time. You can take it from rivers, you can take it from groundwater. Farmers will abstract it to fill up storage reservoirs when it's available. So when water's available, it's getting snaffled up by everyone that needs it because it might not be available tomorrow. And that has to be carefully managed. So when there's a drought, that's restricting that water availability for all those users. And there's whole legal mechanisms around pre-arranged licensing agreements to say, as a farmer, please don't take water at this time, please irrigate in the nighttime. Water companies, you can't do this, you can't do that, to try and maintain those water supplies. Because we need it to drink, potable water supplies. And I don't know if you know, but since 1972, we've been pumping water from the Ouse in Ely, up near Cambridge, Norfolk border, down to Essex, with the Ely to Essex transfer scheme, in a tunnel 12 foot across that you can walk down. And that water is transferred through massive pumping stations and the river network and into the reservoirs. It's really old infrastructure. It's not great because it uses a lot of electricity as well, but it's the reality of Essex being quite arid, having low rainfall and a high population. So drought really affects that potable water supply. It's a real conflict with the environmental issues that we have. It has a big impact on agriculture. We all eat food and we need those farmers to be able to grow. And it has a big impact on the environment and habitats and ecology as well. So what do? We're always monitoring and reporting, and we're always managing that abstraction through the licensing, and we respond to environmental incidents. We get loads of calls all the time, especially fish in distress, which always sounds a bit overdramatic, but people quite often burn up, fish are gasping for air at the surface of the rivers, and we have to go out and do fish rescues and relocate them and that sort of thing, or aerate rivers. And the impact of this drought can have a massive impact on our resource, incident response wise. We've got whole teams now that are just dealing with drought who would normally be doing other work. So if you've written to us for something in particular and we haven't responded, we might be busy with drought. These are available online. We have weekly and monthly water situation reports. So we're always monitoring the rain, groundwater, and the river flows and soil moisture as well. I'll put a link at the end. And this is what we base our decisions on, but all this data that we collect also goes into a national record, which is used for modelling and that sort of thing. So what do low river flows do? Low river flows, you've got greater evaporation because it's warmer, you've got less rain, less water coming in, the river temperatures increase, and you probably know all the different ecological impacts that might have. This is the river store, by the way, just by Judas Gap, near Catawade, in between Manningtree and Brantham. You get excess weed growth, which generates a lot of complaints, but it also suffocates the ecology underneath. The fish are gasping for oxygen. And you can see there a manual aerator. We have two methods of aerating. We either put a machine in that aerates the water. You can imagine, the store is 240 kilometers long, so that's quite a limited response. Or we can aerate with hydrogen peroxide, where you dose the river with hydrogen peroxide, and that extra oxygen molecule atom then oxygenates the water really rapidly. But only a few of our staff can do that because the government don't like people to have large stores of hydrogen peroxide. It has impacts for us from angling because we do rod licenses, but also navigation. The store is navigable and people can complain that we haven't kept it open for navigation. The cost of weed removal, if it's even possible, our operations teams can go in and remove that. And then that can actually cause a pollution event, which then has an environmental impact as well. And the cost of aeration runs into the hundreds of thousands because we need operational staff to deploy them safely and make sure that they're not stolen and that the generators aren't stolen. So none of this is cheap. And where we see more and more of these incidents of low flows in rivers and the impacts it's having, we've got all these competing needs. The water companies need to abstract, and we're asking them not to because we need the flow to shift that weed. It's all these delicate conversations. If we have more periods of prolonged dry weather, more droughts, more hot weather, then this kind of incident is just going to keep happening more and more. It's a huge impact on our resources, and there are some simple ways we can try to combat it, but you're never quite sure how much rain you're going to get that year. So when do you intervene, on which rivers and at what time? Any questions on low river flows? Let's go through that quite a bit. No?
Just, why is removal increasing pollution?
So if you're disturbing a lot of the sediments around it, or because the weed boats that we use and the weed cutting machinery goes in, disturbs the sediments, you've already got a delicate situation because the dissolved oxygen is quite low, and you can actually end up mobilizing pollutants and having an impact on dissolved oxygen. And sometimes it's just not safe or possible to get the machinery in even. So we get lots of complaints. I mean, the River Colne up at Castle Park, loads of complaints. Why can't you do something? It's like, if we did, you wouldn't thank us. So it's quite a hard thing to do.
What do you think would be the main kind of functional ecological mechanisms of removing that naturally? I mean, ducks. I know that there are things that could naturally remove that. What would be some of the better ways, or what would be the kind of most effective?
Most effective way.
Mechanisms?
Yeah. So what I'm working on just now is a memorandum of understanding with the water companies to say at certain levels, can you leave us a bit of extra flow? Because as soon as there's extra flow, they need it to fill up their reservoirs. So it's getting them to leave it alone so we can open. So in this particular location, we can open the gates at Catawade and flush it out to sea. And so if you've got a bit of extra flow, we'll flush the weed out to sea. That's not a possibility everywhere. You can manage the river differently. Quite often, a lot of the management that we used to do, just clearing those rivers, you can argue that that's right or wrong, but it's hard to do now because we try to avoid fish breeding and we try to spawning, and we try to avoid bird breeding seasons, and that really narrows down that window that our operatives have got to go and do the weed cutting. So when you've got the weeds encroaching, I mean, you haven't here because of the structure up there, but where the weeds encroach, you get narrow constrictions and blockages and low flow, and the weed can grow. So we're looking at, can we push that operating window a little bit further into June and just get some of that weed out of the way to create meanders and that sort of thing. And we can look at things like weevils and other things. Personally, I'm not very keen on biological controls because, you swallow a spider to catch a fly and then you get all sorts of problems. So there's things we can do in terms of the physical maintenance of the river. I think there was something like 20, it was thousands of tons on the River Gipping of built up sediment and weed was removed. So once you start removing stuff, where do you put it? Anything you drag out of a river, if you do one machine movement onto your own land, it's fine. If you move it again, it becomes waste and it's covered by the waste regs, and then you've got to pay to have it carted away or treated in a certain way. So removing stuff from rivers isn't very easy either.
I'm more interested in kind of like non-interventionist natural mechanisms. But if I understand what you're saying, you're basically saying that the river is so unnaturally restricted in its kind of channel and its flow rates that that's why from the physical kind of structure up, you're getting a kind of an extreme unbalanced ecological.
Yeah, yeah. And high temperatures where you haven't got tree shading as well, and you see the river temperatures much higher than they would have been historically, but also just low flows, just no rain. You know, if you think back to the summer, you know, it felt like autumn in August in the woods, so crunchy. There's just no water, and so the river flows are really low as well.
Thank you.
But on a practical note, we've spent loads of money on electricity pumping water into the store from the EU's system to use for water extraction. We then open the gates and flush it out to sea. There's all sorts of dilemmas. Wildfire, I'll do this very quickly. We're seeing more wildfires, more extensive for longer, and they're more widespread. You know, we had some in February in 2019. February, that's in the middle of our storm surge season. We need our fire college ready to react to that as well. We don't need them exhausted by wildfires. There can be air quality issues depending on what those wildfires affect. And I think we lost properties to wildfire for the first time properly last year at Wellington in London, where 41 properties were burnt and lost. So we're seeing real consequence of this. It's not so much within our remit, but it's a consequence of long, prolonged dry weather. And it means that that resource amongst that wider emergency response sort of family isn't there if we need them for other incidents. And we have multiple fires across East Anglia. Now, if we're trying to go out and do maintenance work on our defences in 40-degree heat and we spark any fires, you know, that has an impact on our maintenance regime. And it's not just something that happens elsewhere. For those of you that commute from Wivenhoe, this was 2019, that was the trail along the river. Quite minor, but still very present. So more extreme rainfall events, sudden heavy downpours, either widespread or localised. It overwhelms the drains and the surface water ditches, leads to flooding, leads to faster flowing floodwaters, which are inherently dangerous. Falling on baked ground after long hot weather, it runs off really quickly, and you get flooding in places you wouldn't expect it. It creates pollution incidents in rivers because it drags, you imagine all the dirt and detritus that builds up on roads over a dry period, all of a sudden that's all chucked in the river with the floodwater, and the ecologists have to deal with it. Another has like pop drain covers. You can't warn people for it. If there's a thunderstorm, we know there's a situation where there might be thunderstorms, but is it going to affect Coggeshall or is it going to affect Tiptree? You know, it's quite hard to pinpoint, and you can't warn the people. We don't have a service to do that either because it would be too difficult and you'd always be wrong. And this rain radar here is from, if you look at the word London and Thames Estuary there, we had a big flood in Canvey Island in August 2014 and a lot of South Essex, just where you had frontal rain, but with thunderstorms embedded in it. And it just, you know, Canvey Island's a low-lying bowl. It just flooded the whole of it. The pumps couldn't cope. So that's quite steady rain, about 0.5 millimetre, but you'll see that start to escalate in a minute. And another pollution effect that it can cause is the combined sewers. So sewers generally, the surface water goes up and down the sewer, but so you don't surcharge the sewer and break the infrastructure. They have a combined sewer outfall where any excess in big storms will go out and straight out to the rivers where it discharges. So suddenly you're getting a lot of other inputs that you wouldn't normally expect in terms of pollutants as well. And you can see that rain just not leaving. So now we're looking at 32 millimetres per hour over Canvey Island, and that just circulates and circulates all day. And other hazards like pop drains as well. Everyone always drives through floodwater or cycles through floodwater or canoes through floodwater, and manhole covers, inspection chamber covers and things can be popped, and suddenly you've got a real risk and people have been sucked into them and drowned. And if we've got time, I'll just quickly play this. This is what really worries me in terms of future risk for surface water flooding. So this was 2014, this is Rayleigh in Essex during that storm event. There's no rivers near here at all, this is all just rain, surface runoff. So if we're getting more extreme rainfall events and people don't know how to cope with them or how to deal with them, they might only ever experience one. People will always drive through them. You've got all sorts of risks to life there as well. And if you look in just a minute, you'll see a Citroen Picasso bravely coming the other way and sending a bow wave over that car. So this is what that rain radar looked like on the ground. We do see more and more of this, and quite often it's the communities that know first because they're there. We can't gauge this, we don't know it's happening, we haven't got webcams everywhere. So no one can manage this until the 999 calls start coming through. There's the Citroen Picasso, unstoppable, but that could be driving into a hole in the, like a chamber cover hole or something like that. And floodwater is always dirty as well and dangerous. And again, 4x4 is quite happy, but has quite an impact on that poor little Peugeot there. That could be flooding the engine, and a foot of water can float the car. So you can very quickly lose control. So for me, I think we're quite well practiced at river flooding and tidal flooding, but for surface water flooding, it's such a scary risk and it's so unknown.
So it's that the bridge work.
I'll cram far too much in, but we've got a few minutes. Okay, so that's drought, prolonged dry weather, the sort of risks that we're dealing with, and they're only getting worse. Sea level rise. Sea level rise has several impacts on our work. Saline incursion, so saline salt water getting into freshwater habitats. Impacts on low-lying communities, like in the islands and estuaries we've got around Essex. The engineering challenge, which I'll show you, and less of a storm surge is needed to overtop those defences. There's loads of different figures for future sea level rise. Depends which emission scenarios you use. We use IPCC figures with government advice. So when we're giving advice on planning applications or for our own scheme design and things, we're using the specific numbers for Anglia for higher central, that's the millimetres per year. So we're looking at 1 metre 20 by 21, 25. So that's what we're working to in our calculations, about metre 20 centimetres of sea level rise. When we use the H++ scenario, it's a metre 90 sea level rise by 2135, but you've got to pick something realistic somewhere to work to. And there's loads of different numbers that you can use. So we use this, it's available on gov.uk. And I haven't even touched on wind speed, wave height, and frequency of storms either, because that would take a whole other talk. But these are all things we've got to think about in terms of that storm surge risk that we've already seen. So what do I mean by saline incursion? Anyone that knows the Norfolk and Suffolk Broads, this is the tidal Broads area. All of this drains out through Great Yarmouth. Potter Heigham, there's a boatyard. When we've got really high salt, tidal levels in the Broads, lots of salt water, the fish all naturally come into this little boatyard at Potter Heigham. So years ago, a barrier was put there to try and stop the ingress of salt water for the peak of the high tide. And then when the levels drop, the fish can go out again. It really messes with the business, the boatyard business that's there. But that's one of the environmental impacts that we try to mitigate to try and stop a huge fish kill when you've got prolonged periods of very saline water in the Broads. And that's only going to become a bigger and bigger issue to deal with. The Norfolk and Suffolk Broads are still at or below sea level, and sea levels are rising. So you can imagine that's going to become a bigger and bigger thing to deal with. And we have to decide, is that a priority for us as a society? So that's one of the issues, saline incursion. Low-lying communities, if you've been around Essex at all, we've got lots of low-lying communities, dozens of islands, a lot of them inhabited. That's the causeway to Mersey Island, just down the road. Floods really regularly. That's only going to become more common. So access for that community is going to be more difficult. This is Wallasey Island, which has got an RSPB nature reserve on, if you're around that way. That floods as well. Had a van driver stop and sort of say, don't expect high tides on a sunny day. I just didn't have enough time. I just wanted to take him to the pub and explain. But that's just a normal high spring tide. It just floods that access road. And that's only going to become worse. And then Wivenhoe and Rowhedge down the road, right on the waterfront there. This is Rowhedge. Anna will know this well. That's the level just before the barrier shut. So you can see for that old sort of line of properties in that community there, sea level rise, if the barrier weren't there, would very quickly start being affected on quite normal tides. And we've got those dilemmas for sea level rise around the coast. What do you do with those communities? How do you change the planning rules? How do you change policy? How do you make sure that they're resilient in the future? Can you make them resilient, or do you need to move them? And nobody's really got that answered yet. The engineering challenge. I don't know if anyone knows Canby Island in Essex. It's a big area under sea level. This is a lobster smack pub, which is really nice. And this is about 1885. So you can see the height of the defence there. With embankments, you can't just build them higher. You've got to build them wider as well. If you build them a metre higher, you've got to build them about 10 metres wider to keep them stable. Otherwise, they'll slip. And after the 1953 flood, where 40 or 50 or so people were killed on Canby Island, huge defences were put in. But you can see the engineering challenge, because as sea levels rise, you can't keep building this wider and higher, because it becomes very technically difficult, very expensive. This is just one property, but there's loads of properties right up against the back of the defences. How do you defend those people in the future? If you're looking at a metre sea level rise, where do those people go? And that's Canvey Island from the sky. So that red line is the defences like that were put around the island. 17,000 properties, one road to safety. I don't ever want to see that flood. It's very safe. The defences are very good at the moment, but in the future, you know, that would be a emergency response nightmare for me. The back ends, they didn't put all the way around it, they're protected by 2 barriers. But that's a huge infrastructure cost, and that infrastructure is aging and it costs a lot of money. And as you're just saying, you can't just keep building higher and wider. And when our chair said in the news, Emma Howard Boyd said, you know, you can't just keep building higher. That's what she meant. You know, there's people there. It becomes prohibitive, you know, the cost in terms of costs. And every time you walk on the coast, you can see we've got sea walls, hundreds of kilometres of sea walls on our coast. They all look like this. Loads of kilometres of timber revetment, quite old structures often, trying to prevent cliff erosion. Embankments everywhere. You'll see these on all of our estuaries. Clay embankments with Essex blockwork in front, and that's asphalt sort of poured in between. These were built over decades by people paid low agricultural wages. You know, we can't replicate that. And you've got all the same engineering challenges in the future. Should we be replacing them and making them higher? And if so, who pays for it and how do we do it? That's Heacham in the Wash in Norfolk. That protects a massive caravan park. So you can see the dilemmas with that engineering challenge. Rock armour, you'll see rock armour all over the place. We've got some at Cobbold's Point near Felixstowe. This is Jaywick. These were quite experimental in the 80s, but they worked really well to stop that sediment transport, maintain a beach and prevent them from flooding. And that's why they didn't flood in 2013. But is that right? Should we be doing that? How much does that cost? Will that be resilient to climate change and sea level rise in 100 years' time? That whole 4-kilometre stretch of land there with Seawick and Jaywick is all below sea level. Point clear. I was involved in a planning inquiry there. These people shouldn't be there 12 months of the year, but many people sell their homes in London and move there and then live a good retirement. You've got homes built right up to the back of the embankment, 4.5 kilometres of embankment. If that floods and overtops, that will be up to roof height in 15 minutes. It's not a safe place to live, which is what I said in the planning inquiry. But how do you rebuild that embankment any higher? There's nowhere to go, there's nowhere to build it. So these are the environmental challenges, the engineering challenges we have from sea level rise as well. And infrastructure. This is at Hadscoe in the Norfolk and Suffolk Broads, and I was unfortunate enough to be on duty, and the embankment washed out and derailed a train with passengers on. That was in January 30th, and I'm still involved in the legal investigation into that from the Rail Accident Investigation Board. I didn't know we had a legal Rail Accident Investigation Board, but I do now. Loads of our railways cross low-lying areas like this. They're quite often built on embankments. Historically, this was built because the canal was just built, the embankment was built, and then canals kind of went bust because the trains came along. And an entrepreneur thought, I'll have that for a train line. And we're dealing with the legacy of those kind of Edwardian Victorian decisions, really. Sea level rise and storm surges. So I've tried to choose lots of local examples. This is Brighton Sea on the Colne Estuary. That's what it looks like at low tide. It's got big tidal range. That's what it looks like just at a flood warning. That's around the harbour area. That's what it looks like on a lovely sunny day. But you don't need as much of a storm surge to start overtopping those defences because as sea levels rise, you know, whereas in the past you might need 1.5 metre surge to have an impact, you might just need 1.40 metre or 1.30 metre. So that safety margin is being taken away by sea level rise. And then with all that in mind, we've got a bit, you know, we've already alluded to the fact we live in quite an industrialised landscape. Even the pretty bits around Essex, it's all industrialised, all been heavily modified. Most of our rivers have been engineered in some way for a range of reasons, like milling. Bourne Mill in Colchester, nice little spot. Bourne Mill flows through Distillery Lane and then into the Colne. But there's dozens of mills across Essex, and they all modify the landscape. So most of our rivers have been straightened, they've been embanked, they've been narrowed, they've been dredged. And this speeds up that flow of water through the landscape and increases that flood risk. And then when you've got urban areas as well with loads of drains, all of a sudden you get a big rainfall event and it's all ending up in the town or city and affecting those homes all at once. Centuries of agricultural compaction, obviously not blaming the farming sector, they've got to produce food cheaply for us, but it has an impact by making the soil more compact and that runoff more rapid. And urbanisation. And I get annoyed with the language that we use. They always say the rivers have burst their banks. You know, the rivers haven't burst their banks. The rivers in the bottom of this valley, which is built up to it and has stuck the banks there. And the rivers have the audacity to overflow it a little bit. It's really unhelpful language that we still use, because this is how rivers should look, albeit that's the Amazon, but it's the principle. And this is what they quite often look like. So this is Haverhill on the Norfolk, Essex Suffolk border. So you can see the river's been straightened, urbanised, houses built right up against it for lots of different good reasons historically. But that should be much bendier. You know, there should be places for water to go, and there isn't. This is Bedford, nice straight channel there, because it was pretty to promenade along. So we've walled our rivers. We've said, you belong there, you stay there. It's not a natural situation. We build on the high ground. So again, this is the same place in Bedford. So all that extra runoff into, this is the floodplain map for 1 in 100, 1 in 200. You know, all that extra runoff into that floodplain as well. So just trying to explain that urbanisation and that industrialisation over hundreds of years of our landscape has sped up that water, that hydrological cycle, and it delivers that water much more quickly to people at flood risk. And, you know, I've already said compaction, you know, heavy machinery, even livestock, just compacting that soil. So it's less open to absorbing the water. You know, that soil structure is much more compacted. Seasonal activities such as ploughing and having a nice sort of smooth surface on those runs there, you know, that all just helps the water run off. So thinking about how we manage the landscape sensitivity as well can really help. It's not climate change, it's just an impact of human activity over a few hundred years. Nearly there. Natural flood management. So slowing the flow. You've probably all heard about natural flood management. We're trying to do what we can as an agency. It's quite hard to prove some of the benefits, and but clearly by holding water in the landscape and having more trees on hillsides to take up the water and interrupt that water flow, reintroducing meanders and this sort of thing, just allowing the water to stay in the landscape a little bit longer rather than pushing it onto the next person as quickly as possible. Oxbow lakes and pools and lakes and things where the water can be diverted into, all just interrupting that water supply. In the moors where they've been drained for years with channels called grips for grouse shooting and that sort of thing, if you block those and allow those to fill with water and reseed the sphagnum moss, then you're suddenly introducing a sponge back into the landscape, whereas we've spent hundreds of years draining those. And that was part of the reason, I think, why Boscastle was so badly affected, because ordinarily that moor would have taken that water. And as we get to the coast, and it's probably a whole different session, salt marshes and sand dunes, fantastic sea defences, but you need the space for them. And if you've got a defence in the community right behind them, there's not a lot you can do. So that's probably something to talk about another time. It's a whole session itself. So how do we adapt? How do we make ourselves resilient? What do we do with those communities? We always sort of think of the really obvious. So this is at Seawick, just down the road. That's called Redshank House. I think it was on Grand Designs. And it's just built out of the modelled flood level for the next 100 years. So that's somewhere you can go. You can't access it or park your car or get in and out of the shopping, but it's a principle. These have been built in Jaywick, so that whole ground level is not habitable. It might be used for storage, but the habitable levels are above the flood level. So the flood defences are about that high. So we sort of think about very physical methods of, okay, we just build higher, we build on stilts, we might not be being innovative enough, and we've got to think about whole communities as well. And actually, humans have been ingenious for quite a while. It's not a new thing. This is Flint Cottage in Walcott in Norfolk after 1953, massive cliff erosion. Lucky enough not to have foundations. They just winched it to a traction engine and pulled it back from the coast. So, you know, people have been adapting for many years, but how do we do that whole scale in the future from those tidal floodplains? How do we make homes resilient to hot weather? How do we make those communities in places like Bedford and Haverhill that I've just shown you? You can't just move those people, so how do you make them more resilient to that river flooding and that urban runoff? How do you protect those low-lying coastal communities like Jaywick? You know, where do those people go? There's a really tight-knit community there. You can't just say, you know, go off somewhere else and not provide housing. So these are real dilemmas that we're dealing with. Can we move people? Can we relocate whole communities? We've been talking about this for my whole career and not really come up with an answer yet, because it touches on so many different aspects of what we do. Can we make people more resilient to flooding so they can live with the impacts? That depends on how resilient people are themselves. Some people have second homes, some people have lots of money, other people have nothing and they lose everything in a flood. So it's not equitable. You can't do it in the same way for everybody. Loss due to erosion, we just saw Hemsby, that's permanent loss. You know, you can't stop that very easily, if at all, and you can't put that house back where it was. You've lost that land. Resilient infrastructure, we've just seen that rail incident I was involved in, you know, This is a Sky News video of flooding in the London Underground in heavy rain. How do we make our infrastructure? A lot of it is very old. How do we make that resilient? And it all comes down to beyond science. It's about politics and economics and philosophy and sociology, really. So, question to leave you with is who pays? There you go. Any questions? Because I've covered loads of that.